This video is sponsored by World Anvil. I'm pretty new to Pathfinder. I played the game a little bit last year when my brother-in-law homebrewed his own campaign, but I only started running my first Pathfinder campaign in February, using the adventure from the beginner box. The finale of that adventure was delayed when my child was born in March instead of May, but this week we are finally resuming the campaign, and I am already thinking about what my Pathfinder group is going to do next once they finish the Pathfinder beginner box adventure. And I'm sure I'll talk more about that campaign in a future video, because I'm not totally sold on Pathfinder as a system, but I'm still having a great time running the game, so I think there's going to be a lot to talk about there. But as a Pathfinder newbie, there's a lot I don't know yet about Golarion, the world of Pathfinder. So I decided to pick up the Lost Omens World guide so I could learn a little bit more about Pathfinder's campaign setting. And of course, so I could review it for my video series where I review campaign settings. Now, this installment is going to be a little bit different than the previous ones in two ways. The first is that I'm actively working on my own campaign setting right now, and in a minute we'll talk about that in more detail and the impact that has had on reading and reviewing a campaign setting. But the second is that there are other books besides the World Guide that have more information about the various regions of Golarion. I mean, that's true for any campaign setting that's been around for a little while. There's often going to be material in other products that didn't make it into this book. But in this case, Paizo is currently publishing other products set in this campaign setting, each of which fleshes out a specific location. So, you know, reading this book isn't going to give me the full picture of this world because there's all of this other content out there. And yet, I'm still going to review this one product and somehow I expect it to tell me everything I want to know about Golarion? How was that supposed to work? Well, if you'll pardon the kind of long disclaimer, I'm going to talk a little bit about the impassioned reaction to my Forgotten Realms review. This is actually important for this video because we need to establish a baseline for what criteria I use in order for you to understand whether or not this review is going to be useful to you. And so that means going back to a video where I thought I was pretty clear about this, but a lot of folks still got really mad for some reason. I know Pathfinder fans are probably sick to death of getting compared to D&D. You can't even escape it in this video, and I'm sure it might seem like a substantial amount of this video is just going to be me responding to the comments from a previous video. Yes, that's true. See, in the first installment of this series, I dinged the Forgotten Realms pretty hard because I didn't think there was enough useful information being published for new GMs to actually navigate the world in any meaningful way. And so you might expect me to be similarly harsh with the Lost Omens World Guide for skimming over stuff that they then go on to expand on in other books. But that's not going to be the case today. First of all, I don't think this book skims through anything. I actually think this book gives a lot more useful information than what we've gotten about most regions of the Forgotten Realms in, I would say, most of 5e's product set there. But that's entirely subjective, and you might feel differently, very reasonably so, so instead I'll focus on another way these situations are different. Paizo is actually publishing more material about their world right now. When I reviewed the Forgotten Realms, I constantly referred to the fact that I didn't like the campaign setting specifically because of how it was being handled as the default setting for 5th edition. I don't like the Forgotten Realms, at least as the default campaign setting for official Dungeons & Dragons products. I'm not trying to say that there's nothing good about the Forgotten Realms, and I'm certainly not trying to say that you're wrong if you like the setting. I honestly wish I liked it. I'd love to have stronger ties to that world. I don't think the Forgotten Realms is a bad setting, although it's not perfect, and it's maybe not always to my taste. But I just don't think it should have been the default setting. Sure, some of my complaints were things I didn't like about the setting itself, and I tried to make it clear whenever I was discussing something that I just didn't like because of my own personal tastes, but generally my biggest point in that review was the lack of widespread useful setting information available to new game masters picking up the game for the first time. And of course, people in my comments complained about how I was ignoring everything that had been published in the Forgotten Realms novels or the products from previous editions like 2nd edition, 3rd edition, 3.5, even 4th edition had Forgotten Realms products that had useful lore in there. And I was ignoring how great YouTubers like Jordan have a bunch of videos explaining Forgotten Realms lore for people who are new to the setting. But that actually proves my point, and it actually highlights the difference between Pathfinder 2nd edition and D&D 5th edition. The point I made in that Forgotten Realms video was that the Forgotten Realms is probably not a bad setting, but it wasn't being handled the right way. And in fact, someday I do want to sit down and read some Forgotten Realms novels, because I'm sure the world as it's presented in those books doesn't have all the same issues we're going to discuss today. Heck, I'm not even going to talk about the version of the Forgotten Realms that was presented as a separate product for previous editions, because ultimately, the Realms itself is only part of the problem. Of course, it's possible I'm missing all of the best parts of the Forgotten Realms. In fact, I think it's very likely that I am, and that the folks making 5th edition just aren't presenting the information in the most useful, actionable way. People would comment and say things like, the only reason you think the Sword Coast is synonymous with the Forgotten Realms, or the only reason you dislike this or don't know about this, is because of what they're doing with 5th edition.
Right.
Right.
Right. That's my point.
Whenever I review a setting with a lot of history, there's a reason I don't discuss content that isn't currently being published officially by the company that owns the IP. Because it shouldn't be on the audience to do the work on behalf of these publishers. It's kind of their job as the stewards of the hobby to give you useful information about the setting they want you to play in. If I picked up the Player's Handbook and the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide, and I wanted more information about the setting of the Forgotten Realms, then as it stands right now, I either need to start buying other adventures that include more Forgotten Realms details, and even those are kind of a crapshoot. Like, Tyranny of Dragons is technically a tour of the Sword Coast, but doesn't really give you a lot of useful information about it. Or I have to check out content from older editions, or content made by fans, and either way, I need to know where to look to find that stuff. On the other hand, if I read the Lost Omens World Guide and I want more information about the setting, I can just go to Paizo's website, click on the Pathfinder menu, and scroll down to Setting, and then I can just scroll down that page and find a bunch of products being published for the current edition of the game, focusing on different aspects of the world. Like, I knew that a new Tian Xia sourcebook just got released, and that product was specifically revised to be as culturally sensitive as possible, but there are also books for Absalom, High Helm, The Grand Bazaar, The Mwangi Expanse, The Impossible Lands. All that stuff is available on Paizo's website. I can even subscribe and get each new setting installment sent to me the moment it's released. This is all I'm asking for. Well, actually, a subscription service is way above and beyond what I'm asking for. That's going the extra mile. But for any campaign setting, just give me enough information to know why this setting is interesting, and then either give me enough info to make up the details that I don't have, or make finding those details super easy to do. That's something that 5e doesn't really have for the Forgotten Realms, which is why all those people who commented on that video about how there are other resources like YouTube channels and wikis with all of the better information about that setting, all those people are missing the point. I want the publishers currently making the game to actually give us useful information rather than leaving it up to the fans to do it, and I don't think that's a ridiculous request. And look, I sympathize with anybody who makes their own campaign setting, or even just revises an earlier one, because the folks at Wizards of the Coast didn't set out to do a bad job conveying this information to new game masters. But I do kind of think they dropped the ball. I know their adventures include deep dives into specific cities or regions, but it also would have been nice if the Sword Coast Guide, or even the Player's Handbook, had included a little note that said, hey, you know what, just follow this link to get more information about the setting. And then they could have actually provided a simple, bare bones, just the good stuff wiki about the Forgotten Realms. And if they needed some help building those pages, they could have used today's sponsor, World Anvil. As someone who is currently fleshing out my own original campaign setting, I gotta tell you, I honestly think World Anvil is an invaluable tool in not just getting your ideas down, but in making them presentable to your audience. When your players sit down to the game, you don't just want to hand them a notebook full of chicken scratch or hand them a bunch of papers that you printed out with your notes on them, no matter how organized they are. Not only would that be a huge waste of paper, but it's also way too daunting. But if you use World Anvil, then they can scroll and click around and explore your setting to their heart's content. Maybe they just skim a page or two, or maybe they'll do what we all do when we spend too much time on any wiki. They'll fall into a hole and start following different hyperlinks and exploring lots of different aspects of your lore. And that's especially possible thanks to World Anvil's autolinker feature, which gives you the power to generate those hyperlinks across your entire world with just a simple command. It's a huge time saver, and it provides your players with the tools that they'll need to explore your setting at their own pace and follow whatever topics most interest them. And that's ultimately the point of any organizational tool, to anticipate how players and GMs are actually going to use it and provide the necessary support to make that process as easy as possible. And World Anvil is offering a discount to the viewers of this channel. If you visit worldanvil.com/supergeekmike and use the promo code SUPERGEEK at checkout, you could save 51% off of any annual membership. That's more than half off. That is a great deal. Once again, visit worldanvil.com/supergeekmike and use the promo code SUPERGEEK. Thank you so much to World Anvil for sponsoring this video. Now, I mentioned earlier that the other thing that makes this review different from normal is the fact that I am currently in the process of developing my own campaign setting, my own homebrew world. I had a breakthrough recently that really helped unlock a lot of very interesting ideas. And so something that I'm looking for when I'm reading a setting book, like the Lost Omens World Guide, is an answer to the question, why should I use this world instead of my own? Now, probably the most obvious answer would be detail. Any published campaign setting is going to have more detail than something that I come up with my own. And as we all saw from all those Pathfinder products, this world absolutely has a ton of detail. But that's not really what I need. Now don't get me wrong, the details are very nice to have, but a world with a lot of detail can also be intimidating to somebody new to the game, especially if you feel like your players know the setting a lot better than you do. And speaking personally, I don't always need a ton of details. I know it seems like that contradicts my previous point, but no, this actually proves just how little a setting actually has to do for me to love it. Besides the Forgotten Realms, I've only done a full and thorough review of one other setting in this channel, Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. And that book doesn't go super deep into detail very much at all, and yet it still gives me so many ideas, so I actually do feel like it gives us enough to work with. Speaking personally, sometimes I just need a clear enough prompt that I can fill in some details on my own. And if I'm in the middle of a game and I realize I don't actually have all the details I need, I'm a decent bullshitter. I can usually wing it in the moment. So if I'm not looking for details, then what is the appeal of using a pre-generated setting? Well, I think in general, what I'm looking for are ideas. A published campaign setting is going to have some ideas that I wouldn't think of. So the most important question really is, do these ideas seem more interesting than the ones that I have for my own setting? In this case, yes. In fact, I would argue that the first chapter does that all on its own. In fact, let's literally read the first paragraph from the book and see how it pitches the campaign setting. Heroes aren't born, they're forged. Forced by extraordinary circumstances to rise above and shaped by the world they inhabit. This book is a guide to that world. In its pages, you'll learn about the heart of the Pathfinder setting, known as the Inner Sea region, from the towns and cities your heroes call home, to the wild frontiers and monstrous lairs where they'll risk everything in search of fortune and glory. The information presented here provides players with a sense of the setting as a whole, and is perfect for both fleshing out existing character concepts and inspiring you when you're not sure what to play. Is your wizard a necromancer from haunted Ustalav, raised to battle the undead armies of the Whispering Tyrant? Or a young student at the Archiminium in Absalom, the city at the center of the world? Perhaps you're a daring priest from the burning deserts of Quadira, blasting manticores and genies with the blazing light of the sun goddess Serenray, or a troll-hunting warrior from the icy lands of the Linerum Kings. Regardless, here you'll find the rich details you need to give your character the perfect backstory, as well as new backgrounds, gods, feats, spells, and other rules to help you customize your ideal hero. Likewise, game masters will find a rich and exciting world filled with hundreds of inspiring characters, plots, and adventure locations to get their creativity flowing, as well as new gear and magical items to reward their band of adventurers. Will you take your group to the rugged land of Numeria in search of alien technology from a crashed spaceship? Might they fight devils and diabolical Cheliacs, or instead ally with the denizens of hell themselves to reforge a troubled empire? They could venture into the ancient pyramids of Osirian, where mummies guard magic from a lost age, or battle dragons in the fractious orc hold of Belkzen. Whether you want your party to face pirates or giants, elves or dwarves, vampires or sphinxes, there's no end to the threats and treasures lurking in the ruins of lost empires, in temples to forgotten gods, or just beyond their campfire's light. The Inner Sea awaits. Are you ready? Boy, recording that was a ride. That's a lot of proper nouns that are tough to say. But yeah, based on this intro, yeah, I think this book definitely has some ideas that I wouldn't have thought of on my own. So this does feel like a campaign setting I want to run a lot more games in. And this brings me to the first question of my campaign setting rubric. Does Golarion have a clear premise? And the answer is, well, yes and no. I don't think it has a simple elevator pitch. It's a fantasy setting with a bunch of lore. You can argue that there are some major events in the world's past that are really important. They show up on the timeline in several different regions, but I personally wouldn't say that it's easy to sum up the premise of the world. However, the world does have a clear concept. It's a kitchen sink world. Like, even more so than a lot of settings I've looked at, this campaign setting has everything. The book itself focuses on the Inner Sea region, so the first chapter only briefly references some of the other lands of Golarion, like the lost empires of Casmaran, or the weird alien frozen city at the North Pole. But even just in the regions covered in the book, we've got an island raised from beneath the sea that's now the center of civilization. We've got the broken land full of demons and robots. We've got the Eye of Dread, which is like Mordor, except the orcs are the first line of defense against Sauron's return. We've got the Golden Road, inspired by North Africa and the Middle East. We've got the High Seas, full of all sorts of weird islands. We've got the Impossible Lands, dominated by two warring nations, founded by a pair of rival immortal wizards. We've got the Mwangi Expanse, a dense jungle full of diverse civilizations. Old Cheliax is a very gothic horror-inspired nation. The Saga lands feature an icy tundra controlled by the Baba Yaga, and also, maybe the new queen is Anastasia Romanov from our world? And the Shining Kingdoms almost seem like the platonic ideal of high fantasy, with knights in shining armor and courtly intrigue and spycraft as part of a way of life. These are all oversimplifications, but the point is, this corner of the campaign setting that they chose to focus on has a lot of variety available. Also, I just want to give a shout out to this setting for incorporating their spacefaring product line directly into the description of this setting. Before we even get to the paragraphs about the different planes of existence, we get an entry on the solar system, so we know in no uncertain terms that Starfinder is intended to be integrated into the system from the very beginning, at least from the perspective of the Pathfinder newbie being introduced to this setting through this book. You can feel however you like about whether you enjoy sci-fi concepts in your fantasy game, but I think this setting does a good job of integrating those themes into the world, so it doesn't just feel like a tacked-on aspect you could easily ignore. Also, the paragraph about the solar system is a fantastic pitch for Starfinder, because each world description implies a totally different style of adventure. Like, just to name a few, Octurne is Lovecraftian horror, Akaton sounds more like Edgar Rice Burroughs' Martian Chronicles, Eox reminds me of the Shadowfell or Thay, Aposte might literally be a Death Star or a war world. It all sounds rad, and it makes it a lot more likely that I'm going to check out Starfinder at some point, probably sooner than later. The next question is, does Golarion have a distinct tone? And no, not really. It's a kitchen sink fantasy setting, so for the same reason it doesn't have a super simple premise, it also doesn't have a single clear tone. However, normally the reason kitchen sink settings don't have a clear tone is because they wind up trying to include so much that they just become fantasy soup. And I do like fantasy soup, don't get me wrong, but inherently, fantasy soup always feels a little bit less distinct than something like Thane Richten's Guide, or The Witcher, or Avatar, where the intended tone is super clear across the board. However, in this case, because each region has a really clear tone, we don't have fantasy soup. We have a fantasy buffet, I guess. It all complements each other, but because it's all distinct, each section of the world is allowed to retain its own specific flavor. For example, the city of Absalom is very different from the Broken Lands, which seem much more my speed. They're more of a points of light setting, yet they very openly refer to a starship that fell, so it's not like this region is low magic or low fantasy. And in fact, the Broken Lands, the Eye of Dread, and the Old Cheliax all have some heavy horror themes, but they all also feel like their own thing, and that's genuinely impressive. The next question is, does Golarion have iconic imagery? And again, in this case, I wouldn't personally say that the world of Golarion has iconic imagery, although the game itself does, through the characters they literally call the Iconics. But again, each region does have something that's all their own. Old Cheliax has the Strix, who are mysterious black-winged humanoids. The Impossible Lands have the Mana Wastes, a magical battlefield ravaged by arcane storms. The Broken Lands have a huge scar left by a former dimensional rift. I don't think there's any one thing that screams Golarion, but there's stuff that evokes the specific areas of the world. Next question. Does Golarion offer character creation inspiration? And yes, definitely. You might remember that in the Forgotten Realms video, I said there seemed to be no difference if you made a character from Waterdeep versus Baldur's Gate versus Neverwinter. The 5th edition books didn't give you anything that made those cities feel distinct in terms of creating a character from those locations. In this book, each chapter is dedicated to one of the regions of the Inner Sea, and they all end with a bunch of backgrounds and a dedication, which is a Pathfinder thing that gives you a bunch of different feats. For example, the Shining Kingdoms chapter gives you the Lion Blade dedication, which is all about being a super sneaky spy with just a hint of magic. Next question, does Golarion give you plot hooks you can use for your games? Answer, absolutely. This book has more than a few antagonists who could come into play in all sorts of interesting ways. One of my favorite aspects of this world is the Whispering Tyrant, an evil lich, which already just makes him one of my favorite things. I love evil liches. But also, he's tried to invade Absalom, and he's trying to rebuild his forces in the Broken Lands, where he's had multiple evil plots detailed in that chapter, so there's a lot you could do with him. There are also mysteries all over the place. There are lots of moments in this book where they basically say, and then this weird thing happened, and boy, that was sure weird, wasn't it? Nobody knows what that was about. Anyway, moving on. That's a clear invitation for you to decide what happened if you want to expand on those mysteries and make them central to your campaign. And there are some things where the book just says, hey, here's something crazy that's currently going on. Nobody knows what's going to happen with that. And that could not be a clearer plot hook for a GM to use that as the inciting incident for an adventure or a campaign. For example, in the Broken Lands, there's an AI who crashed to Golarion along with that spaceship, and now that AI has become a god, and she's trying to figure out what that means for her as she gains more worshippers, and nobody knows what's going to happen with that. And look, I know I've talked about the Broken Lands a lot, and that's for two reasons. One, my child is in a really clingy mode these days, so I was holding them while I was reading the second half of the book, so my notes are just a little bit more sparse for those chapters because I just wasn't really able to take notes that easily. And two, there's an AI god who fell from space, so yeah, I'm gonna have some thoughts about that. Now, the next question I ask of any campaign setting is, does this setting have daunting lore? And this is the one time where I don't think that I can give a completely definitive, not all subjective answer. Speaking personally, I feel like I'm in a much better position to run a game set in Golarion now that I've read this book. That doesn't mean that I've memorized all the relevant lore or anything like that, but I do think this book does as good a job as it could of simplifying the lore. Is it perfect? I don't know, I was really struggling to keep track of a lot of the proper nouns, but again, I'm a new dad, so that might not be an issue with the book. That might be user error. Honestly, a better test of this question would be seeing how I feel after I've used it for a few games. But I do think the book makes a lot of smart decisions in presenting the lore for a new Pathfinder GM. For example, just about every page has some piece of lore on the sidebar, just presented as its own thing. This is smart, because including those details in the main body of a chapter would make the book a lot tougher to get through. It would make the text a lot more dense. But those are also really fun details that give the GM a lot to play with, so you want to include them, and these are a great solution to that problem. These sidebars tend to give us important NPCs, magic items, and interesting notes about the politics or economic system of each nation. And each chapter opens with a timeline running down the sidebar, which is a really smart way to divide the timelines up so they're a lot easier to track, rather than trying to put everything on one timeline in the front of the book. Even the title page for each chapter tells us the names and logos of local nations, factions, religions, and resources, and that's just a really smart way to offer some information in an easy-to-reference location. And our final question is, are there any blank spaces on the map? And yeah, I would definitely say so. First of all, these maps are zoomed out pretty far, so it would be trivially easy to add things like villages, forests, swamps, landmarks, stuff like that. The Mwangi Expanse chapter literally says there are a bunch of cultures, more than the ones listed in the book, but those other cultures are hidden so most people don't know about them, which means you can create new nations and they can be as prosperous and flourishing as you want, and they're narratively justified as something that most people wouldn't know anything about. So the book's authors definitely want you to feel like you can add to this world, and they are sending that signal early and often throughout the book. And everything beyond the Inner Sea is left very ambiguous, although as we have discussed earlier, some of those locations like Tian Sha have received their own supplements. On the website you can find those books. And that's true for some of the locations in the book as well. Like, Absalom gets a full write-up in this book, but also gets a full book dedicated to more info about it. So it is possible, I dare say it is even likely, that those details will reduce the amount of blank spaces on the map. But hopefully it won't reduce them to 0 and fill in literally every blank. Don't do it, Pathfinder. I've seen it happen before in other fandoms, and it's not pretty. That's how you get Star Wars fans. Do you want Star Wars fans? Because filling in every detail, that's how you get Star Wars fans. But also, this category doesn't always have to be literal. There can be metaphorical blank spaces, places you can fill in on the gaps. And yeah, I would definitely say that's true here as well. For example, Absalom was raised from the sea 5,000 years ago, and lots of enemies have tried to conquer it in that time, not just the Whispering Tyrant. So if you want to tell a story involving consequences of an enemy who tried to invade Absalom at some point in the past, it would be very easy to add those details to your version of Golarion. Look, I don't know how often I'm going to play Pathfinder. I have some more games lined up, but the game hasn't always been to my speed, and it's got its pros and cons. But that has more to do with the system rather than anything else, and like I said, we'll talk more about that another day. If we're discussing Pathfinder's ideas, this setting helps show off the fact that they've got some really great ones. But this book succeeds for me not just on the strength of those ideas, but also because it strikes a really solid balance between giving you a lot of information and overloading you with too much information. And I get the feeling that I'm going to be running games in Golarion for a long, long time. But let me know what you think. Do you like Pathfinder's setting? If so, what do you like about it? If not, what is it about the setting that doesn't do it for you? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe and ring the bell, do all the YouTube stuff. Consider supporting me financially on Patreon or Ko-fi, or by becoming a YouTube member. Your support helps me pay the bills and keep the lights on. Join my Discord server to join a bunch of awesome people having awesome discussions about these sorts of games, and sign up for my mailing list to get my newsletters. All those links are in the doobly-doo below. Click here to watch my video about building an atmosphere at your table and setting the mood for your games. Until next time, play fair, and have fun.